Let's take a look at what is your general overview of what the polls are looking like in this presidential election.
The polls are closer than I think I've ever seen in a presidential election in my life. Everything is within the margin of error. Usually a poll has about 1,000 respondents with a plus or minus of 3%. And in this case, the polls, particularly in the battleground states, are looking like they're within 1 or 2 points of each other. So what I'm saying is that every single poll is within the margin of error. Essentially, it's a coin toss as to who's going to win this election right now. And the national polls are similar. I think at the moment it shows Vice President Harris with a slight lead, but a lot of that's going to depend on turnout.
And can you tell us a little bit about one thing I think is interesting is looking at each of the battleground states. What do you think are the pros and the cons in each of those battleground states?
Well, Georgia is probably the one that Republicans are looking at having the best chance of winning. The problem is that Metro Atlanta has attracted people from all over the country to move there, because the cost of living is low. It's a pleasant place to live and the weather's nice. The problem is you're getting a lot of people moving from more liberal parts of the country to Metro Atlanta, and Metro Atlanta absolutely dominates the state. Georgia is a large state in terms of area, but the problem is that the southern part of the state, which is the more reliably Republican part, in the area around the mountains on the Tennessee border, which is also reliably Republican, those areas tend to be more lightly populated, and therefore it takes a lot to offset Atlanta. North Carolina is divided into basically 3 parts. The eastern part of the state is largely Democrats. The western part of the state is largely Republicans. The area between I-95 in the east and I-77 in the west is the battlegrounds, where you're going to find large metro areas like Raleigh-Durham, Greensboro, Charlotte. North Carolina has tended Republican in the last few elections. What has got me a little nervous about the state, actually there are 2 things. One is there is a highly flawed Republican candidate for governor who I think is going to lose. And the question is, does he drag down the Republican vote in that state? Or do voters split where they vote for Trump but vote for somebody else for governor? I don't know. The other thing is that, of course, the western part of the state was hit really hard by the hurricane. And the problem is that that may affect voting in terms of ease of access to voting and getting absentee ballots to these folks. One area of that part of the state that is highly liberal is Asheville. The rest of the state, from I-77 west of the Tennessee state line, again, is heavily Republican, but more likely populated. If they can get ballots to those people, they can vote. And early voting seems to be very strong in that area. I think the Republicans have a really good chance of winning the state. That's a big if right now.
Let's move on to Arizona and Nevada.
Okay.
Can you look at those 2 states?
Arizona is traditionally a place where Republicans win, but there's been a major influx of people moving in from California. So metro areas like Tucson and Phoenix have become considerably more purple than they've been in the past, where the state was solidly red. Rural areas, again, tend to be more Republican. Immigration, I have a feeling, is going to be a big issue. Just like in North Carolina, where you have a flawed person running for president, in this case, I'm sorry, did I say president? I meant to say a flawed person running for governor. In Arizona, you've got Carrie Lake, who is running, I believe, for the open Senate seat there. And Ms. Lake is a bit flawed also, and maybe a drag on the ticket. So again, it's a question of whether people are willing to split their vote. But at the moment, I sort of see Arizona being a bit more like North Carolina, and then I think that people will probably split their vote, and Trump probably will carry Arizona. Nevada is really interesting. Nevada used to be one of the most reliably Republican conservative states in the country. But as time has gone on, it's picked up a more heavily Hispanic population. People are moving there. It's a pleasant place. Las Vegas seems like a lot of fun. People are able to find jobs in the hospitality sector. And so you've got a heavy union presence there. And that state is trending more and more, I wouldn't say blue, but certainly purple. That's a hard one for me to call. I really couldn't say it right now. I think that's a coin toss. It could go either way.
And do you think those reasons are why all of a sudden Nevada's in question here?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else on that particular end, do you think? Because it is kind of odd how Nevada has voted in recent years, and then all of a sudden it seems like it's starting to be more in question now.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do, again, with a heavy Hispanic move into the state. And Hispanics, while culturally conservative, also have a tradition of voting liberal, but they're not as liberal as, say, African Americans. African Americans will give about 90% of their vote to the Democratic candidate. Hispanics are more willing to split the vote, but the best I've seen a Republican do is about 40 to 45% of the Hispanic vote, and that was George W. Bush, about 20 years ago. So it's tough for me to get a read on that state.
And the last two, really the last three, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, who have been open since 2016, have been considered battleground states.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about those three?
Okay, well, let's start with Pennsylvania. James Carville, the Democratic consultant, really said something that sort of resonated with me. He said Pennsylvania is Philadelphia in the east, Pittsburgh in the west, and Alabama in the middle. In other words, basically, the rural parts of the state are heavily Republican. The rural areas along the border with New York in the northern part of the state and the central part of the state, with the notable exception of State College, which, because it's a college town, tends to be a bit more liberal, that is solidly Republican. Philadelphia, the city itself, is very liberal, but you have some suburban areas that may be ready to break for Trump. I think Trump's got a better chance in the Pittsburgh area, especially with his talk about tariffs to support certain industries. I think people who are, working in what's left of the steel industry will welcome that. So I think Pennsylvania is ever so slightly leaning towards Trump. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the Philadelphia area, because there have been some signs that African Americans, particularly men, are willing to vote Republican this time. Usually, as I said a moment ago, a Republican can only hope to pick up about 10%. In the last election, Trump picked up something like 15% of African Americans. And there are some polls, they may be outliers, but suggest that it could be as high as 25% this time around, largely because of African American men voting Republican. In Michigan, again, you have a heavy union presence in the area around Detroit because of people working in the auto industry. But also you have a wild card, and that wild card is a large Arab and Muslim presence in the area. Now, there is a city, I wish I could remember the name of the place. It is a suburb of Detroit. It's majority Muslim. The city council is all Muslim. The mayor is Muslim. The mayor has come out and endorsed Trump. There's disappointment in the Harris-Biden administration because the Biden administration has taken a very pro-Israel position in the current conflict in the Middle East, and a lot of the people who live in Metro Detroit, who are either Arab, Muslim, or both, are not happy about that. So there is a possibility either they will vote for Trump rather than Harris in order to sort of teach the Democrats a lesson, or they may just stay home. It's entirely possible that they just don't vote. The rest of the state, I think, again, is probably a bit of a toss-up. Detroit is usually reliably Republican. Trump didn't do himself a favor. He made some disparaging comment about Detroit while he was in Detroit, and that may hurt him, but that depends on whether people are watching the news. And I'm not so sure that John Q. Public is. Wisconsin is got two heavily liberal areas. You've got the city of Milwaukee, and you've got Madison, the state capital, which is liberal not just because it's the state capital and state employees tend to be liberal, but also because it's where the University of Wisconsin is located. The rest of the state is largely rural, largely working class, and I think is very open to voting for Trump. You may recall that those three states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, were part of the so-called Blue Wall, which Hillary Clinton neglected to campaign in for the last few weeks of the race, and they ended up going to Trump. Now, the next time, because of, I would say, maybe some Trump fatigue. They switched back to their normal position of being Democratic states. But polls seem to suggest that Trump has a slight lead in all three of them. Now, when I say slight lead, I think in one of them, I think it might be Michigan. I think it's like 0.2%. But keep this in mind also, that Trump, like a lot of Republicans, tends to underperform in polls. In other words, there's a hidden Trump factor in the polls. People usually tell pollsters what they think pollsters want to hear, and a lot of people aren't ready to tell the pollsters that they're pulling for Trump. So it may well be that Trump is doing better. I think also that, in the case of those states and nationally, Vice President Harris, while trying to run an upbeat campaign, has run a campaign that's largely devoid of substance. She hasn't really staked out well thought out, well presented policy positions. And I think the American people are getting tired of the same shtick where she said, when she gets asked a question about, why is inflation so high? Well, I'm from a middle class background and my mother brought me and my sisters up, and that's great. And it's a really folksy story, but it doesn't answer the question, how is my life going to improve? I think that, pretty much you're going to see this campaign come down to things like tabletop issues like the price of gas, the price of food, the price of clothing, the price of rent, kitchen table issues like that. And I think immigration is going to loom large as well. And those are things that are going to help the Republicans. However, abortion is a big thing for Democrats, particularly women, and it may also sway some independent voters. A number of states are putting initiatives on their state ballots to legalize abortion in their states, and that may drive Democrats to the polls in those key states that Trump will need. We'll see what happens.
So which of those three issues do you think benefits each candidate? In other words, what are, do you think the economy, who do you think the economy?
That clearly benefits Trump.
Okay.
Clearly benefits Trump. I don't have a doubt about that. The Democrats have been doing a good job about getting the inflation rate down, but the problem is that the average American has to live with the damage that the higher rates that came earlier in the administration have already done. Those prices are, those inflation rates are already baked into the prices of stuff. For example, you used to be able to go and get, maybe a double meal over at Wendy's for like $8.50, and now it ends up costing about $11.50 to get the same meal. Eggs have gone up, milk has gone up, bread has gone up, meat has gone up, and these are things that people need to buy for their families. I know for myself, I live in an apartment complex, and they wanted like a 22% increase in the rent this year. Nobody can afford that. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I think that works for Trump. Yes, the Democrats have gotten the rate of inflation down, but as I said before, it hasn't helped lower the prices that much. Also, if war breaks out in the Middle East in a bigger way, look for gasoline prices to jump up. There's talk that the Israelis are going to hit back at the Iranians. It is almost certain that they are going to attack energy infrastructure in Iran in order to kill Iran's ability to make money. That could cause a massive spike in oil prices because of the so-called terror premium. And it looks like war is going to break out. If there's something that stops the production of oil prices go up.
Okay, and because there's a couple other issues I want to get to,
Sure.
but the immigration and abortion, what do you think? What issue benefits what candidate?
Immigration clearly helps Trump. Again, all you have to do is watch TV, and you will see, thousands of people every day trying to cross the border into the United States. Vice President Harris talks about the immigration bill that came up earlier this year that she says would have helped get the problem under control. The fact of the matter is it's not exactly accurate. The bill would provide for allowing up to 5,000 people getting into the country a day before the provisions of the bill would kick in to restrict illegal immigration to the country. Also, I think Hispanics, the Democratic opposition to taking a stronger stance on immigration, I think comes from this misguided notion that they're somehow going to win Hispanic votes on this. But most Hispanics who are in the country came here legally, and I think that they feel a little sense of resentment that they observed all of the legal procedures, that they did everything the right way. And then you have these other people now coming in who are jumping the line. And even if they do share the same ethnicity, there's some resentment that, hey, I played by the rules, and now you're letting in all these other people that aren't.
Abortion.
Abortion clearly works for the Democrats. I think there's a misunderstanding about exactly what happened. So let's sort of go back a little bit. There were, while Trump was president, 3 openings on the Supreme Court. And he was able to appoint 3 conservative judges to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and I'm sorry if I'm drawing blank on the woman's name, Amy Coney Barrett. And those 3 helped create a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. And when the Dobbs case, which originated here in Mississippi, was being debated in front of the Supreme Court, I should say argued in front of the Supreme Court, they were among the justices that voted to overturn Roe versus Wade. And what it did was, it didn't outlaw abortion. This argument that it did is completely erroneous. It simply turned abortion back to the states. And it said that just like any other issue that regards matters of life and death, it's a state-level issue to decide. And some states like Mississippi have, as a practical matter, gotten rid of abortion, but it's present in most states. Liberal states like New York and California, it is very widely and very easily available. In other states, there may be some restrictions on it, but it's still fairly available. In turning things back to the states, it has come on the ballot in a number of states, including conservative states, where you would think that given the opportunity, maybe they would vote to ban or highly restrict abortion. But like, for example, in Kansas, where restrictive measures were placed on the ballot, it lost 2-1 in Kansas. So a lot of places, even the conservative states, are preserving abortion rights at the state level. Now, some people are arguing, well, yeah, but then I have to travel to another state. I get that, but just like any other issue, states have the right to make up laws that make sense to themselves. And if you want an abortion, you can always travel to another state. Like even here in Mississippi, you could easily travel to another state and get an abortion if you want.
Okay, so the one thing I wanted to make sure I got to, and I think it kind of kicked me out, so I'm going to have to go back in.
All right.
But this is going to be the reaction to the student poll from the campus.
Okay.
Now, this was only like a very small sample group, so it was like 56 students or whatever.
Right.
But it was, so it's pretty small, but I think it does provide some interesting insights of what students are thinking. So the poll favored Trump in a landslide, 83 to 10%.
Wow.
What is your reaction to that?
No surprise. Mississippi is a solidly red state. Most of our student body comes from Mississippi. I think it also sort of reflects the more conservative values that the school, upholds. And so it is no surprise that it's no surprise that Trump's winning. I think the only surprise is the magnitude of that win in the poll.
And also it mentions 7% other, like if a third party or they wish there was another candidate. Right. So that's interesting too. Then they go into what is the big issues that people are concerned about. 85% said inflation and rising prices.
Right.
71% said that jobs and the economy were concerned.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
59% said immigration.
Right.
And national security was 54%, crime 38%, education 35%, and I think that's it. So what is your reaction to that?
That doesn't surprise me. Obviously, young people your age are looking to go to college in order to better themselves. They want to get a career, and they want to know that when they get out, there's going to be a good paying job waiting for them. They want to know that they're not going to have to live like a starving student for the next decade and a half while they establish themselves. They would like to be able to know that they can get a decent apartment or maybe even get a house and start working on having a family, and to maybe put away some money early for retirement and take the kids to Disney World once a year. And I get that. And that's why I think that those issues mean a lot. The ability to get a job and the ability to afford things obviously is going to be very, very critical. I noticed that, for example, I don't think you mentioned abortion on that list. So I guess
it was not.
So it was not an issue on this campus. I do, as somebody that whose primary area in political science is international relations and national security, it does hearten me to hear that that's an issue for the majority of respondents that you had in the polls, because if you look at what's going on in the Middle East, basically Iran is starting to sort of terrorize Israel and, to an extent, friendly, moderate Arab countries, and there is the potential for a large regional war that could morph into the Third World War going on there right now. And Israel is, I think, going to need the backing of the United States. In a sense, Israel is sort of a surrogate for the United States. They are our front line. We don't have to fight wars in the Middle East because they do it to defend themselves. And I think that there is some concern that the Biden/Harris administration, on one hand, is giving weapons to the Israelis, and for that matter to the Ukrainians, but then tying their hands behind their back by telling them, but you can't use them in certain circumstances or in certain ways, which is asking them to fight, in a sense, a half war. And then we tell them, well, now you better ask for a ceasefire. Usually it's the loser that's asking for a ceasefire, but Israel is winning the war. Israel is cleaning out the Middle East of terrorist elements, and I think that they deserve more robust support. However, there is one thing that concerns me a little bit, and that is the people in the MAGA movement, the Make America Great Again movement, do tend to have a little bit of a neo-isolationist streak in that, they don't mind doing things to defend the United States directly, but they don't want to get involved in conflicts overseas. And there's some suspicion, especially with regard to Ukraine, that we're helping a corrupt government out. But I think it's pretty clear, especially since they are now getting help from North Korea, that Russia is in fact a danger. And not only are they a danger, but they are becoming increasingly dangerous because they are not succeeding, and they need to get help from North Korea in terms of manpower. About 10,000 North Korean troops have been deployed to the region, and they have an agreement with North Korea in order to get all sorts of weaponry to help them out because the Russians are blowing through ammunition.
And then there's the potential threat of with China and Taiwan that has been kind of floating around for a while.
Right.
That's a potential thing that a lot of people are concerned about because of the repercussions it could have on us.
Right.
So briefly, because we're kind of running out of time here, briefly tell me, what do you think, how does that play into this, or what do you think is the threat of that concerning the outcome?
Well, I think the Chinese have a pretty level-headed government. I'm not saying that they're good people. Clearly, it's a communist regime, and they're looking out for their interests. And I wouldn't trust them any further than I can throw them, but you need to take into account that it's a power that if they want Taiwan, but they don't want a smoldering radioactive crater where the island used to be. They want Taiwan whole, and they're a major trading partner with the United States and with other democracies like Japan and Western Europe. If they go to war, they lose a lot of that. And so I don't think that they're as anxious to go to war. I think they are anxious to try to bully Taiwan. They want to prevent the current Taiwanese government from declaring independence. That both countries sort of look at themselves as the legitimate ruler of the whole thing, of all of China. And the Chinese would love to see Taiwan come back into the fold voluntarily. They are doing provocative things like testing missiles by shooting them over Taiwan. They are repeatedly penetrating Taiwanese airspace to see what the reaction would be. They've conducted military exercises on the Chinese coast in order to simulate invasions of Taiwan. But I don't think militarily, even if they wanted to do it, that they're ready to do it. There's word that President Xi has sort of set a target date of 2027 for the commencement of any possible invasion. But as I said before, I think that they've got too much to lose. And if they invade Taiwan, I think that they know there'll be a reaction from the United States. There will be a military response, I'm sure, possibly from the Japanese. and I don't think that they're ready for that, to be honest. Also, there is the possibility that Taiwan has nuclear weapons. It's not talked about much, but during the 1990s, intelligence sources were of the belief that maybe three nations were working together because they were international pariahs, and each one brought something to the table that could benefit all three. Those three countries were Israel, South Africa, and Taiwan. All pariahs for different reasons, all having the need for nuclear weapons. South Africa admitted after the white minority government stepped down and we got the new ANC government in there that they did have 4 operational nuclear weapons, and they got rid of them, and they cooperated with their neighbors to declare Southern Africa a nuclear-free zone. So we have some evidence to suggest that this was going on. Israel is believed to have up to 600 to 800 nuclear weapons. They've never told anybody about them, but intelligence sources tend to believe so. So there's reason to believe that maybe Taiwan is not advertising that they have nuclear weapons in order to keep China guessing. I'm not saying that they do. I'm just saying that the circumstantial evidence is there to suggest that they might, and China might not want anything to happen that will adversely affect their population and their territory, because China's got what, 1.3, 1.4 billion people. If Taiwan in fact does have nuclear weapons and they think that they are going to be overtaken by China, you could easily cut that population in half with several nuclear strikes on the mainland. Again, I'm not saying that that's going to happen. That's way outside the realm of reasonable possibility. I'm just leaving it there as something that could happen.
I mean, anything else you'd like to say?
Well, I think it's going to be a really interesting election. I think that you will probably not know until the next day, because I think there'll be a heavy turnout, both in terms of early voting, which doesn't get counted until the polls shut down, and just regular voting. Most of the states that are going to swing the election one way or the other are in the eastern 2 time zones, so there is a possibility that we could at least get some idea by about midnight which way it's going. But don't be too surprised if this does not get resolved until sometime the next day.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.